Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on Friday morning. I know it's been a long week. I know that people are still adjusting time zones. I know there are time zones to adjust to when you get home, so thank you very much for joining us this Friday morning. My name is Stephen Grootes. I'll be your MC. Almost made a comment there. I'll be your MC this morning and through this afternoon as well. Please don't forget our afternoon plenary session at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We're very excited about this next session because it's the launch of the Public Development Bank reference book, and it's the culmination of a set of research by the Global Research Network, the Secretariat of the Finance and Commons Summit, the World Bank Group, and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And I don't need to tell anyone in this room how important this research is and the impact it could have on how banks, public development banks around the world really do behave and drive development around the world, and how important this research could be. This morning, first, the research will be introduced. Our moderators this morning are Professor Jiajin Zhu, the Executive Deputy Dean at the Institute of New Structural Economics at Peking University, and Thomas Melonio is the Chief Economist of the French Development Agency. Then you'll hear from Remy Roux, the Chair of Finance and Common and the CEO of the AFD. Then Li Junhao is the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We will have a broader conversation after that with a bigger panel, with a bigger group of experts, including Ndidi Nkonkwo Nweli, Professor Mariana Mazzucato, Dr. Sidi Ould Tah, and Aniket Shah. We do expect the session to last until around 10:30 this morning. There are other sessions that start immediately afterwards. They have a very diverse group of topics. So as we finish, when I come up on the stage at the end, don't feel you need to wait for me. If you've got a session to rush to, please feel free to go and do that. I would like, if I may, to start by inviting all the names of the people I've mentioned to come onto the stage for a group photograph, because, as you know, if it hasn't been on social media, it hasn't happened. So if I may invite all of the members, all the panelists and speakers to come and join us for a quick photograph. Thank you. Would you like to come? If you could stand together, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. So the photographer is at the back, if you can see them over there. Someone is waving. You know, it's not often you see a happy photographer, so thank you very much indeed. May I invite our moderators to please take over the session and to introduce the topic, after which we will have Remy Roux and Under-Secretary General Li to come and speak. Please feel free to stay up here if you're comfortable to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So this session is really about providing you with the latest results of the research that we've been conducting within FIX. From the start, FIX has been giving space, time, and really importance to the work of a number of researchers. So we have structured two things. One is a global research network led in particular by Jejun, Régis Maraudon, also my colleague Jean-Baptiste Jacouton. In the first place, I'd like also to name Stephanie Griffiths-Jones, who was there from the start and participated to our work. But also more recently, we structured a network of chief economists with my esteemed colleague Zef Nleko of the DBSA and Eric Bergloff at AIIB, our co-host. Before we move ahead, the idea of this panel is to really give the main insights that we take back from a number of years of research, whether from the database, but also you will find them summarized or detailed in this PDB reference book, It's still an ongoing work, so this edition is for consultation, so we hope that you'll be able to comment and maybe help us improve that document. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Jia-Jun Xu, who has been our colleague and partner from the start at FIX. So we worked on this set of conclusions together. Maybe Jia-Jun, if you join me here on stage, I mean, you're already on stage, but to help us provide with the main takeaways from the research. And also later on in the panel, we'll discuss about the points that are more uncertain so far. In particular, we have worked a lot to provide details on how institutions are set up, the way PDBs, whether MDBs, regional, nationals exist, their numbers, size, and so on. However, we have worked a little bit less on the way the system itself works. So today's panel will probably deal a bit more with the way the system works rather than providing information at institutional level. But without further delay, Jia-Jun, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. Distinguished guests and dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to take this opportunity to share with you the key findings from the PDB reference book that we will launch today. So as Thomas mentioned that if we go back to 2015, when the Addis Ababa Action Agenda was held at that time, we know very little about PDB. There was no comprehensive and reliable list of PDB, let alone their size, their role, and their effectiveness. But as we know that we live in a world that we, as an international community, we have to work together to achieve SDGs, and financing a comprehensive, holistic, and transformative approach to financing SDG is a key in this endeavor. And PDB has been a very important potential instrument for achieving such kind of transformation. And this has motivated my team, and in collaboration with AFD4D and many other colleagues who are also sitting in the room today, to work together and to try to build the knowledge, collect the data, and to make the frontier research feasible. So I would like to just give you some highlight of the key findings from the database and the research under the umbrella of the Global Research Network that I initiated back in 2019. So one of the key findings we found is that PDB has been prevalent worldwide. We have identified 536 PDB and DFI from 159 countries, whose aggregate total asset adds up to 23 trillion USD, accounting for 10% of global investment. So this is really challenge the conventional wisdom that PDB, they are periphery in the financial system, and they only play a very minimum role. So this is our key finding. It also highlights the strategic importance of PDB in the global financial architecture. And secondly, our research and our data has shown that PDB are not transitory financial arrangement. The conventional wisdom argues that as countries move in high-income country status, they have full-fledged capital market and well-developed commercial banking system. PDB should be abolished, commercialized, and shut down. And this is not the case. According to our database, the high-income countries still have quite a number of PDB, and whose whole total asset play a very pivotal role in the national financial system. So this is really begs question on the why question, why we need PDB, how we can make them work better. And then more importantly, we have devoted a lot of effort to collect the financial indicators like total asset and ROA and ROE, and this help us to better understand the size distribution of the system. So our finding is very astonishing because we find only very few mega banks, like China Development Bank, China Exim Bank, and those big ones. This China Development Bank has helped to accelerate China's industrialization and urbanization process in the past 4 decades, and they have grown into gigantic financial institutions. But by contrast, in the African continent and many other European countries, PDB, the size of PDB are still very small, despite the vast financing needs. So there's a great demand to unleash the full potential of PDB in this country to accelerate structural transformation in an equitable and sustainable manner. And more importantly, as Thomas highlighted earlier, regarding next step, it's really important for PDB to work as one system, one ecosystem, to take advantage of their comparative advantage, to work together and to make contribution to the SDG agenda and beyond. So this is the key finding from our database and global research network. I would want to highlight that this has been a collective effort among the researchers, and the number of the researchers has been growing. And we really hope that more and more colleagues can join us in this endeavor. And this is high time to unleash the full potential of PDB with all our collective effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor. May I invite Remy Roux, the Chair of Finance in Common and CEO of the AFD, to make some comments. Thank you. He's graciously accepted answering some questions from our moderators afterwards as well.
Good morning everybody. I'm here honored to have Under Secretary General Li Runhua with us on stage. Really to thank you all in the room. On behalf of the whole Finance in Common community for this reference book, for all that the research is providing to our common endeavor. So it all started, I remember, dear Jia-Jun, I think it was in 2018. We had the meeting around the IDFC in Beijing. We were there, and the idea of yes, a specific program, a global research network around this category of financial institution was accelerated or was born there, and I'm very happy to see 7 years afterward that there's been more than 100 original papers published, a group of more than, well, let's say 50 deeply committed academic researchers and think tanks participating this global research network. I want to mention Peking University, of course, Stellenbosch here, I4C, FERDI, WRI, ODI, where all the partners that are gathered. Don't want to forget anybody. And what I like in what you're doing is there are newcomers. It's growing, including I heard that there was an excellent meeting in Stellenbosch with the 5 biggest universities in here around Cape Town to exchange with students, young researchers about what we are doing, because we need new forces also, new ideas, innovation in the way we capture what we are collectively doing, and the way forward we don't know, basically. And that's why it was so important. That's the message I want to convey, that Finance in Common was built from day one, even before 2018, day one, on science, on research, and on this core group of academics that you gathered. So I really want to thank you and express how important it is to base the institutions and policies on science, especially when it's about public policies, it's about public institutions, it's about state-owned banked. And we know that it's not an easy issue, never been, among economists. It's up to having maybe a bit of a biased perception of this group of institutions. That was my perception when well, for a long time. And so I think here this reference book is a milestone, really, summarizing 400 plus contributions, helping us tremendously identify the category I've seen year after year the acronyms changing, so now it's called PDBs. So okay, let's accept. I know it's not all banks. I know there are DFIs and PDBs, but it seems that after 7 years we are comfortable to say, okay, this maybe could be an asset class, or it's a category per se. And what I like in the document is that it's a category, but out of an incredible diversity, which is I think really the beauty and the potential of this group. Its consistency as well as its various capacities able to provide. I was struck of many gems in the document. The small island developing states institution, so capillary and so big in their GDP. The War Finance Corporation in the US in the First World War. I didn't know. I learned reading the book. And so it helps us build FIX through, and it's a document we can widely share that is easily readable. What I like also in the document, it's very candid, meaning there are chapters about business models and how challenging they are. There's even a chapter on failing public development banks, including reminding a French experience, humbling for us, which is fine. I mean, that's what research and science has to bring to the discussion. Difficult questions. We know there are risks attached to public development banks. Governance and corruption is probably the main one. But there are ways to tackle these risks. That's also the lesson we hear from history. So again, really thank you for that. And there's also an encouragement. Mariana Mazzucato is here, also to see the banks not only as a correction of market failures, but also as institutions that have and can help shape markets. And I want to stress here, because it's in the rooms as well, that this issue of carbon markets that is so important these days. These markets, if we want us to deploy and be impactful and of course with the required integrity, we need now, after 10 years of negotiation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, we need public development banks to step in and to help build the infrastructure of these new markets. I close by saying that it's a journey, so it's not finished by far. The book also identifies avenues for future research, and probably it will come from the panel and the discussion as well. The governance issue I was referring to has to be probably more deeply researched through case studies. We know we need way more data, so the database that at the heart of Finance in Common is unique. It's fantastic. I see everybody now referring to it, but we can refine it. We can extend it. We can provide more information on alignment, non-financial dimension of what the banks can provide. And last but not least, we need the banks themselves to turn to research. So maybe the connection with academics has to go both ways. I discussed yesterday at the dinner with Uli Volz about work done with Caisse des Dépôts et Gestion in Morocco. That's extremely important to have institutions open to research to better themselves. I stop here and, of course, close by saying that we're all working for the success of FFD4, Mr. Under Secretary General, and we hope that this summit, this reference book, will help set the right architecture, help emerge an ambitious and impactful framework out of the UN conference in June. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ru. If I may now invite Li Junhao, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And of course, after that, our moderators will ask some questions. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's a so great pleasure to join you this morning to launch this reference book. As moderator just now introduced in a very substantial recommendations. But let me just say a few words. First of all, that we from the UN Secretariat, we believe that enhancing our knowledge and understanding of the key sustainable development challenges is very, very critical at the present moment for developing effective policies and interventions. Therefore, my department, the UNDESA, plays some pivotal roles in thought leadership together with prominent scholars and also this network by generating, analyzing, and compiling research and data, of course. And this work is aimed to inform the impactful and the targeted solutions to global challenges. So the research and analysis often conducted with the partners like the FIX, like the World Bank, and also the other stakeholders will certainly support the global policy processes, especially to the national policy makers in tackling the complex challenges for the sustainable development. So UNDESA is very pleased and privileged to have the co-edited this PDB's reference book with the FIX Secretariat and the AFD. Well, we believe that this comprehensive reference book compiles findings from numerous studies and academic papers and draws the real-world experiences of the public development banks over the decades of the operations. So it's the best reference book to share the best practices and also to come up with the impactful recommendations. We also believe that this wealth of knowledge will guide the policymakers or petitioners and the research community as they aim to leverage the full potential of the PDBs, particularly in closing the SDG and climate financing gaps. So in this context, I'm greatly honored to join you to commend this reference book as done by the FIX Global Research Network and the PDBs for building a robust evidence base around the public development banks at all levels. Your work actually has been the very substantial contributions to the discussion process at the UN for the fourth international conference on financing for development to be held in Seville, Spain in July. So I would conclude that the strengthened role of the PDB in the international financial architecture is expected to be a key part and also the key deliverables at the FFD4. I myself, as a conference secretary general, I certainly, together with my team, would like to see the role of the public development banks would be a prominent focus in this pre-conference and during conference discussions when we lead up to the Seville event. So the drafted outcome document to be endorsed by the leaders and the ministers at the Seville conference will certainly recommend very leveraging development banks as a critical instrument for financing to bridge the gap on the SDG financing. So last but not least, once again, let me join the colleagues to congratulate this network for this amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you, Under Secretary General. I now invite the moderators to moderate the panel. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, really, to both of you. I forgot to say it, but I'd like also to thank very warmly Shari Spiegel, because we have worked extensively with her and our team in the preparation of this book, and Mr. Undersecretary General has talked about our cooperation, but I'd like to mention it. Maybe on my side, just one question to both of you. You said it, Mr. Lijonnois, we are on the way to FFD4. What are the things that you think should be unlocked between now and FFD4 to improve the way the system works, either between public banks, but also with their outside environment? And maybe same question to Rémi Rioux. What are the things that you personally hope will be changed, improved between now and next summer, so that FFD4 improves the way the system works? That would be my question, maybe.
Brilliant. So I would like to build on what Thomas had mentioned. I want to raise a question for both Remy and Under Secretary Lee about how the Global Research Network of PDB can contribute to shaping the discussion in the upcoming FFD4. As we know that the Addis Ababa Action Plan calls for a transformative, comprehensive, and holistic approach to financing SDG. But very unfortunately, the current international sustainable financing system has fallen short of adopting such approach for a couple of reasons. Number one, they tend to focus on short-term target. This may lose sight of the long-term vision. And number two, they tend to adopt a transaction-level approach focused on project level, which fails to address the systematic barriers that we need to foster the transformation and build the systematic capacity. And last but not least, we see that there's a growing trend of building, thematically focused fund, which has tackled the problem in a piecemeal and silo manner. If we carry on with this path, we will miss the target. So my question to both of you, you really want to get your insight, how we can contribute to shaping the agenda and to call for a paradigm shift of a transformative state approach where PDB can play a very pivotal role on that.
So I start. Good questions. If you allow me, I will think about it also for this afternoon, where we will have the closing session, where we will try to draw the lessons from, and it's always difficult because in such a forum you never know exactly the sum of all the angles, the discussions which took place between so many people, and of course the timeline to FFD4 is now very short. And my first answer would be FIX has never been a demonstration of public development banks for themselves, pro domo. It's really about bridging issues, bridging other systems, I would say, than our own. So actually this afternoon, I hope we will hear from civil society, from private sector, from research, what they are thinking about and how they want this group to contribute. And of course, as part, I would not say of the systems or the stakeholders, we have the governments. They have multiple ways to interact, and they are the shareholders of this institution, and they are the parties that are negotiating the conclusions of FFD4. So probably from Cape Town to Sevilla, there's a bit of work to do, so that the people around the negotiating table of FFD4 understand what we are doing, the spirit of it, and the contribution we want to provide for the best possible results in the geopolitics of the day, to the reinvention of, let's say, international cooperation and the implementation of the agenda we set a decade ago and we want to stick to, which is the UN framework we have on our jacket, Li Runhua and I. So I would say this system has to talk to other systems, and that's a condition of success. And we know in Europe, we discussed this yesterday, I will do it myself in my own constituency. Then, second element, I think we reached probably a milestone here in Cape Town in seeing the PDB system. Because before organizing it, you have to see it and think about it. And that's where, again, I want to insist of the importance of the reference book, because it's the first time we clearly see and measure what we are talking about, the size of it, the diversity of it, and it's somehow this is becoming to stabilize, I would say. And then, of course, next step is when you see the system, its complexity, its diversity, you can try start organizing it. Look at the comparative advantage of each of its layers, sub-coalitions, see what's working, what's not working, see the reality of it, also beyond what we can dream of the contribution of PDBs. And there are very interesting figures from AI studies about, okay, we have the SDGs, but what are really doing the sum of the 536 Regis is here, public development banks on the ground, and what can we do with the difference between the two? And then, and I close by saying, this division of labor, of course, can be guided by incentives. And well, you heard François Villeroy de Galhau, maybe the president of, the governor of Banque de France, but also the head of BIS. For the first time, a regulator coming on stage for the opening session and saying, okay, I have an interest in thinking how NGFS could discuss with FIX, with GFANS, with these coalitions, so that it's not only we are doing our homework in silos, but somehow the silos, again, the systems are trying to find the best possible solution. And that's an area for research that is uncharted, I would say. So I really invite, again, all of you to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, for your good questions. Let me rephrase your questions into the two dimensions. One is what would be the impacts or expectations and impacts from the FFD4 or Seville conference. And second aspect, that's in this process, how the PDBs can contribute for the preparation and also its implementation. Let me say first, the very harsh reality before us. Since we launched this 2030 agenda from Addis Ababa about 5 or 6 years ago, now the harsh reality is only about 17% of the SDG targets can be met by 2030. And globally speaking, financing gap or SDG financing gap is about $4 trillion annually. So we'll see this is really a dominant challenges for the entire UN membership, whether or not we are still committed to the fundamental agreement we launched about 6 or 5 years ago. That's the first thing. And second thing, yes, we know the gap there and how we can catch up. So from all corners of this global community, high expectations have been reflected for the outcome for the Seville conference. So whether or not it can be ambitious, whether or not it can be deliverables, there should be a number of the benchmarks for the success of the outcome from the Seville conference. So including those prominent issues like number one, whether or not we are able to scale up SDG financing, whether or not we have the specific targets, steps, and time frame, and then also mechanism. Second, whether or not we can facilitate the global south to address the debt restructuring issues, in addition to the discussions in the IMF, the G20, or other international fora. Number three, whether or not we could inject new policy incentives to the global south as well as to their partners for domestic resource mobilization. Number four, whether or not we could inject a new impetus to improve the global development cooperation framework. Now, last but not least, whether or not we could accelerate our reform process on the existing international financial architectures. So that's a kind of the very prominent issues before us, before the policymakers, before all stakeholders. That's why we say the expectations are high, at stake is also very high. So then, what would be the durable, what can be achieved in this process? Certainly, PDB has a very significant role to play. Number one, to fill the gap or to narrow in the gap in financing. Still, definitely, we need to see that the more prominent role by the public development banks, in addition to the multilateral development banks or national banks. Second, in this preparation process, PDBs, or the gathering of the PDBs like this fix, certainly would inform the policy discussions before and during the Seville conference to leverage the profile, to hear your strong voices, your strong concerns, and then also your ideas, innovative recommendations. Last also, not least, whether or not we can have this whole system work together to implement what can be agreed and what can be recommitted by the policymakers in the Seville conference. I will stop here.
Well, thanks a lot to both of you. So we had planned that you would have to move, unfortunately, to other panels, but we are going to welcome on stage other panelists. Maybe just a few quick takeaways. Rémi Reyou told us to work a little bit on the way the system of PDBs works, but also outside of the system, and also think about the comparative advantage of the various institutions. Maybe it's sort of topics we could discuss with the later panelists. And Undersecretary Lee Junhua, you reminded us first of the harsh reality, the high expectation, but also in a different manner, you encouraged us to work on how we can scale up, treat debt, bring new incentive for domestic revenue mobilization, and also work on the reform of the financial architecture. So this is the sort of topics that probably we're going to continue working both in research and during the panel that would immediately follow. So without further ado, thanks a lot to both of you for joining this panel and sharing your remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed for those interventions. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Good to meet you. May I now invite the other members of the panel. We'll have a more traditional panel discussion. I'll invite the moderators to sit at that end, and then if I can ask all the other members of the panel to please come and join us. The CEO of one is Ndidi Okonkwo Nweli. Dr. Sidi Ould Tah is the CEO of the Banque Arabe pour le Développement Économique in Africa. Professor Mariana Mazzucato is a professor in the economics of innovation and public value at University College London. And Aniket Shah is the managing director and global head of ESG and sustainability research at Jefferies. You can sit at the far. You can sit at the far end and use the microphones. Yeah. Aniket, could I ask? Yeah. Thank you. Do you want to sit? Sit over there. Thank you. It's a big book. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the distinguished panelists joining our discussion today. I would like to, start with the question for Annette. So, in the first phrase, we have this kind of big picture on financing SDG and what are the systematic challenges we are facing today. And since the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the from billions to trillions agenda has become a very prevailing paradigm. And the logic behind this narrative is simple and straightforward. So basically there's vast financing gap which cannot be solely filled by the billions of public money. We have to crowd in and catalyze private money in order to fill the financing gaps. So basically the argument is trying to fill in the financing gap but has little attention paying to the quality of private sector financing. And what's worse, in terms of quantity, they are still fall short of fulfilling the promise. We see very limited amount of private money has been mobilized. So, and also on the ground, we also see there are many pitfalls of private sector mobilization, such as, we see private sector may extract excessive subsidy from public sectors. They may tend to prioritize, risks, but socialize benefit and profit. So I think you are well positioned to shed some insight on this question because you have very rich experience in private sector. You also completed your doctorate dissertation on PDB. So my question for you is how would you think that the private sector mobilization agenda can be reformed to mitigate the pitfalls and to foster a paradigm of public-private cooperation that really can help us to achieve the ambition of financing SDG? Please.
Wow. No softball to start off the panel. You got straight at it. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me here, and a huge congratulations to AFD and to you, Professor, for your work on putting this database together. When I was a researcher, a young PhD student writing about public development banks, I literally dreamt of this moment that all the national development banks would come together and discuss what they needed to do together. And I told my wife when I came here that this is like seeing a dream come true. So huge congratulations to you and to AFD and to Remy and Regis and Thomas and just all of you. I'm thrilled to be here. This question about private sector mobilization, I want to talk a little bit with more specificity because it's such a broad conversation, and I don't want to just talk in generalities because these panels can very quickly get into generalities. So let me talk specifically about private sector and MDBs and NDBs and focus the conversation a little bit more to why we're all here. And let me lay out just a few main agenda items for me when it comes to this gathering and the private sector. First things first is that I think high up on the list of what FIX should be doing and what we should be focused on is mobilizing the extra $1 trillion that could be mobilized by the MDBs right now. We all know this. The G20 has done remarkable work on this. Many of the credit rating agencies have contributed to this assignment as well, that better optimization of the balance sheets of the multilateral development banks, we could leverage an extra $500 billion to $1 trillion pretty quickly. I think we should spend a lot more time making that a reality. Why? Because as someone who talks to the markets all day, every day, the beauty of the MDBs is that the buyers of those bonds have no idea that they're doing anything for development. They really don't. They have no clue that they are buying a bond that is helping finance good things in the world. They don't know, they don't care. They're buying AAA rated paper and they're just doing that with their eyes closed and with a little bit of yield. So I like that as a starting point. And I think that is the easiest, in quotes, easiest $1 trillion that exists out there for development. My second recommendation is that after that $500 billion to $1 trillion, let's say $500 billion because we're going to be modest, the MDBs should develop much closer linkages to the NDBs, including the many, many national development banks today that can't go to the public markets themselves, they can't go to the bond markets, and that will start getting these PDBs or NDBs to life. And you would know better than me, Professor, of how many of these NDBs are not able to issue bonds themselves. The numbers are significant. A large majority, especially in low-income countries, cannot issue the public debt markets. And I would like to see that linkage become much more prominent. So that's my second agenda item. Again, because the end investor, my client at BlackRock, Wellington, Fidelity, Capital Group, you name it, T. Rowe Price, they would have no idea that they are doing anything to make the world a better place. And so I like that mechanism. So that's point number 2. And then point number 3, high up on the agenda as I was reading the book and thinking about some of the topics that I think are important, is that we need to spend more time talking to the borrower as opposed to just the intermediaries. So the next time FIX comes together, I would like to see a panel here of 10 companies that have borrowed from public development banks and ask them, what was it that the Rwanda Development Bank did for me that no other commercial bank in Rwanda could do? And why is it important that we scale? I just made, bringing that up because it was a chapter of my doctorate. But, why are we focused on the PDBs from the borrower side? And I think that will also unlock a lot of ideas around where the future of NDBs go. Of course, NDBs operate within countries where there are other where there are other commercial banks. And so they're not the only ones lending. And so we have to understand that system. So you mentioned the importance to think systemically. It's not just systemically of PDBs to MDBs, but it's PDBs to commercial banks too. I have a lot more thoughts on this, but I'll just say that the private sector, at least the way I see it, from, again, someone who sits at the 6th largest investment bank in the world, talks to investors every day of my life. If you want to access the big money, you have to do it in a way that that person has no idea that they are financing development. And the MDBs and the NDBs with credit ratings actually can do that. Everything else is a bit of a slog.
Okay, my next question, goes to NDD. Early on, you told me that you were concerned about the cost of capital for national development banks and for developing countries in general, but also probably the volume of flows that goes to developing countries. Annika just made a formal proposition and designed a form of specific role for multilateral development banks, MDBs, and if I'm not misinterpreting, but saying they should increase their flows towards national development banks. Do you agree with that in relationship to the question you raised privately earlier on the cost of capital and the issue of volume of flows that goes to developing countries?
Thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to be here on such an esteemed panel, and congratulations again for this pioneering work. I actually agree. I think that we do need substantive capital to fund economic growth, development, infrastructure, and it's no chance that we're sitting here where we had the B20 this week, the G20, and we're talking about the future of financing that the world needs that's fairer, that's equitable, and that's just. And I really believe MDBs and public development banks should play a greater role in supporting economic structural transformation and building resilience. Now, what we have seen over the last week is countries retreating. The US cutting ODA, we've seen the UK following suit, and we know that the funding required has to be catalytic, has to be patient, and development banks have an important role to play. We also know that African governments and African countries pay over 500% basis points more than their counterparts. At the One Campaign, we've looked at how much is flowing out of Africa versus coming in. And actually, there's more money flowing out of the African continent that is coming in. And it is unacceptable when we need this investment. And it's no chance that South Africa is hosting the G20. So we have this unique opportunity. I really believe it's critical that we unlock this funding at this time. And what does that cost of capital really mean? It means that there's a premium, a risk premium placed on funding for some countries, and Africa bears that burden. It's tied to structural issues, not liquidity issues. It's tied to a bias that this continent is riskier. And actually, the data shows otherwise. We've heard from the IFC this week, we've heard from private investors, private equity funds, that the default rates was 3.6% for IFC investment, about 14 billion, and recovery was 72%. That shows that in many, many countries, our risk premium is unfair, and that there's a differentiation between risk placed on countries versus investments within those countries. So I'm calling for some urgent inflection points, but also the platform to leverage the data that we're providing, which is critical, but also the importance of taking an ecosystem lens to how we price debt in Africa, and to look at the private sector, the commercial banks, definitely, the development banks, both the multilateral institutions. So we really need to boost the financial power of the funds that are coming into the continent and across the board to use our existing capital more efficiently. We need more transparency and accountability. We need to be judicious about cutting the red tape, and that's where development banks often get buried. And I like that idea that we have to have borrowers, and I'm an entrepreneur who has borrowed and who has existed, and I realize that from a borrower perspective, the efficiency and effectiveness of development bank needs to be raised. We need to be laser focused on impact and accountability and reporting. And I think the good news coming out of Africa needs to be shared globally to change this mindset. And then we need to meet the ambitions of the borrower. And the World Campaign, we have data that shows that it makes business sense to invest in Africa right now, and that for African governments to really meet the demands of their people, we need to do it fairer, more equitably, and I'm looking forward to partnering with many of you to do that.
Thanks again, Ndidi. My next question goes to Sidi Oulta. You are the leader of a bank, so you were encouraged at the same time to take into account the needs of your customers and your clients. At the same time, the role of MDBs, but also regional development banks. Badea is somewhat an MDB, also with regional dimension. How do you see improvement in your relationship with your funders? Could be MDBs, could be the market, and NDD just will give us information, also proposition on how to reduce the cost of capital. How do you see that particular issue and your role in the financial system?
No, thank you very much. I had the privilege to start my career in National Development Bank and to end up in multilateral. So, and in between, I have also been a customer to banks. So I have a 360 view on the question. So what strikes me is the diversity of PDBs. And definitely, as mentioned by Anit, we need to help National Development Bank, particularly from the MDBs, since these institutions have the possibility to tap resources on the capital market, given their high rating. So I do believe that we are not doing enough to support National Development Bank. So we at Badea, we have started a few years back to support some of the National Development Bank, not only through providing line of financing at a relatively very low cost, but also supporting their risk management services, because that's a critical point. One of the main issues faced by National Development Bank is the high level of NPL. And that can only be tackled if we strengthen the risk management process within this bank. Of course, these banks are not immune from, because since they are owned by government, they are not immune from directives from the government, which can orient them to take some risk. But also that's part of the rule of the game, because they are supposed to do what the private sector will not do. and to bring also long-term resources which are not available with the commercial bank. What is needed at this stage is to have a more systemic approach to the support from MDBs to NDBs through cheap money. Because since MDBs have the privilege, given the high rating, to raise funds at a relatively very low cost, to pass that financing to NDBs to enable them to provide financing for critical sector and for SMEs. Particularly in Africa, SMEs are facing, only 20% of SMEs in Africa have access to market, to credit. So that's a very low rate of access to credit, and it can only be changed if we strengthen the National Development Bank. Of course, commercial bank should play a role, but what we realize that when you give a line of financing to a commercial bank, they tend to price it to their customers the same, they price their own resources. So that's an issue, which is not the case for National Development Bank because they are under the government directives.
Thank you, Sidi Oulta. So again, you support messages from Handicap and from NDD on the sort of a more systemic approach of relationship between MDBs and MDBs so that the benefits of AAA might be shared with other financial actors. And also you encourage us in the research program, we have not worked that much on the risk policy of NDBs, a little bit on the governance, but we don't have that many numbers on typically non-performing loans, the cost of risk within banks. So it's something that we could expand, which would relate to what NDD said earlier on, how risk is perceived. So probably providing information, measuring risk would be a way to strengthen the argument. So over to you, Judge.
Excellent. I would like to raise a question to Professor Mariana Mazzucato. So you have been a leading figure in trying to argue for an approach of market creation and try to reignite the spirit of public entrepreneurship. And as it comes to SDG financing, you have made a very strong case. We need a paradigm shift from the gap-filling approach to shaping finance. And it argues that the gap-filling approach has been approved to be inadequate. So they tend to simply focus on mobilizing additional more money, but has failed to anchor SDG as the heart of economic and financial systems. So my question for you, I really want to get your wisdom and insight, how we can direct the trajectory of international financial architecture and to reignite the spirit of public entrepreneurship, where the PDB can be a key engine for that. So please, the floor is yours.
So thanks for the question. Thanks for the great work to the AFD and to yourself and the group of researchers. So I've, as you say, kind of been repeating myself at the risk of boring people for more than 10 years, I think 13 years, that the paradigm shift is not only needed, but it's part of the problem. There's a link between theory and practice. John Maynard Keynes had a great quote. He said, practitioners on the ground who are kind of getting the job done are actually slaves of defunct economic theory. And that defunct economic theory, in my opinion, is this idea that, at worst, government get out of the way, policy is useless, it's just there to kind of level the playing field. But at best, and this is the problem, at best, it's to fix a market failure. And even these narratives that begin with, there's a financial gap, which, by the way, there is, and it's very good that the Undersecretary General for UNDESA reminded us the number. He said 4 trillion, some even say it's 7 trillion, so it's anywhere between 4 and 7 trillion. But the idea then that there's a gap to be filled, like a bucket that we go around and ask whether it's the MDBs, the NDBs, private finance, and so on, is part of the problem. So moving away from market fixing to actively creating and shaping markets actually means a different design of the policy itself. It also means a different level of confidence in the room. I sometimes joke that I come in as an economist and I walk out as a therapist or a life coach. I'm like, come on, man, the deal. And so if you're seen as just de-risking, you're already going to be set up for getting a bad deal. You're sharing risks. You're welcoming uncertainty on both the public and the private side, and then you have to share the rewards, right? So this socialization of risk and privatization of rewards dynamic that we've had in places like Silicon Valley, where almost all the technology was actually publicly financed, but also in terms of renewable energy and health, where something like 75% of new molecular entities with priority rating actually came out of public investments, and then the prices and the intellectual property rights don't reflect that. That happens because of how we've designed this very boring narrative that one side is creating wealth, one side is taking risks, and the other side just needs to be a lender of last resort, a market fixer, an enabler, a facilitator, a de-risker. It is so boring, you really wonder why anyone would even enter the civil service being described that way. And yet people do enter, and they're often heroes, notwithstanding the doggy, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Anyway, so 2 key points here. One way to change that, and it's not just an economic framing, it's literally, again, the confidence in the room. What I'm really interested in is good examples, and Remy was absolutely right. Let's learn from the bad examples. Good examples where that active shaping of markets happened through the way that a national development bank interacted with the private sector. And there's great examples in Brazil through BNDES. There's great examples also in Germany. So, for example, the only reason there's green steel in Germany is because the National Development Bank, the KfW, put it as a condition for the loan provided to the steel sector that had to commit to lowering the material content of production to receive that loan. If they weren't interested, back at the end of the queue, come back when you change your mind. They did it through repurpose, reuse, recycle technology through the whole supply chain. And it's not about micromanaging and telling everyone what to do. It's about thinking, how can we get these banks to be linked with a vision, what I've called missions? Because then all of a sudden, you're not just lending out money for cute little projects that might be interesting, but you can actually have transformation. So if you have a net zero goal, what does it mean for how loans get dispersed to all sorts of different sectors, and they're no longer seen as sectors to glorify through some sort of sector-specific industrial strategy, but a mission-oriented industrial strategy where that patient, long-term, committed, mission-oriented finance crowds in the private sector if they're willing to work with you to solve big problems. And that conditionality, a lot of us don't like that word because it's kind of a traumatic word that makes us think of the conditions, the regressive conditions set by, say, the World Bank and the IMF in the past, where the conditions lent to developing countries was conditional on reducing their fiscal space just by obsessing with deficits, which ironically, by the way, increase debt to GDP because it means you're not actually investing and all those things that create long-run drivers of growth. But that idea that actually we need to also create, you mentioned an ecosystem, Didi. Public banks on their own aren't going to create markets. They also need demand-side tools, and that's why it's really interesting also to look at examples where the loans were given out conditional, that their private sector be part of the solution and not part of the problem, but then those companies were helped to scale. So we don't obsess about startups, but scaling up matters, and it's through tools like procurement, right? A demand-side tool where the government might want to have, for example, healthy, tasty school meals for every child in a country. That requires a different way to do the purchasing. And if you do it in an outcomes-oriented way, again, with conditionality to find solutions to big problems countries are facing, then you have the public finance providing the loan and procurement creating a market. And so really, and I'll stop here, the idea I think both for this G20 hosted for the first time on the African continent, but also the COP30 coming up in Brazil, is to use also experiences in South Africa and Brazil where the different tools, the levers that governments have from the public loans to procurement, but also digital governance are used for transformation, for reaching goals, the COP goals, but also these 3 themes that the current presidency of the G20 has put out there on solidarity, resilience, and sustainability to change that public-private partnership instead of just talking about crowding in or fixing markets or filling gaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina. Maybe just an early warning for the panelists before we have time for a second round of questions. Before we leave at the end of this session, we're going to ask you what are the 1 or 2 propositions that you'd like to make and advocate for FFD4 so you can prepare, but you won't be betrayed or stabbed in the back. You'll be asked to do that before the end of this panel. But now we're moving to the second round of questions, and Jia-Jun, you start.
Well, thank you very much for the very inspiring input from our panelists. I think there's one cross-cutting that argument that across our panelists is this kind of how the public development banks can be more proactive and how they can play as a public entrepreneur and to invest in mission-driven investment for transformation, to solve the problem of misperception of risk on the ground, as Didi highlight, and to really become an agent for change. But I see there's a kind of gap between theory and practice. So in theory, PDB are created and owned by the government. They should have a great risk-bearing capacity. They should be in the leadership role and try to create market, to be on the frontier, to push the boundary. But in practice, based on my observation and research, I find that there are many constraints of PDB. One constraint exactly is highlighted by Aniti is that they issue bond on the capital market, like MDB, World Bank, EIB. They care about the AAA status. And then, as a result, the US private credit rating agency like Moody's and Fitch has become the de facto regulator of our supranational institutions, especially after the recent financial crisis erupted in 2008. These private credit rating agency has modified and substantially changed their rating methodology. And this is actually make this kind of MDB and NDB that issue bond become more risk averse. They tend to be, may become the follower instead of the leader. So my question for all the panelists, if you can provide your insight and input, is what can be done, both in terms of the reform of the credit rating agency and in terms of the reform of the business model about PDB to make sure that they can really achieve the potential, become a public entrepreneur, to become an agent of the transformative change and transformative scaling that we really need today. So maybe start from you, and then it.
Yeah, the credit rating agencies and the IMF both are big problems when it comes to these issues, just to put it bluntly. The way that credit rating agencies work right now is that they penalize countries for having debt, and then it creates this self-fulfilling problem because they can't borrow more money.
Yep.
Because if they do, then their credit rating goes down. They don't disaggregate the debt, what it's for. So if a country is borrowing debt to invest in education or health, it is largely assumed to be the same as if they were doing it for building a stadium. And the IMF debt sustainability analysis is even worse, by the way. I teach this in my class at Columbia, and I couldn't believe it. When I started looking into it, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, that it was so basic how these people think about the world, but of course with huge knock-on effects. And so you see a handful of countries in Africa, only a handful have investment-grade credit. And most countries in Africa don't have any credit rating from the major international credit rating agencies. And look, a lot of people at UNECA and others have written what should happen. Should there be some Africa-focused credit rating agency? We can discuss and debate that. But the first thing, and it should be part of this discussion, is that we need to re-examine the process there, and we should re-examine the effort. And I say this with a lot of respect to the credit rating agencies. They are important parts of the world, but they get things wrong. They got 2008 wrong. We know that. They played a pretty bad role leading us to global financial crisis. We should look at what they are doing more closely when it comes to this. So that's what I would say is point number one. And the IMF, by the way. The IMF DSA also needs to be re-examined. The second part of your question about the risk-taking nature of public development banks, it's very interesting. I was advising a national development bank in East Africa around 5-6 years ago, and we were helping them figure out what regulatory construct they should have with the central bank. It was fascinating, actually. Should they be regulated the same way as a commercial bank? And something that you, of course, know very well about, but it's actually a very tricky question. And the question is really, is their mark of success the same as that of a commercial bank? I think we would all agree that the answer to that is no. It shouldn't be, because if it were, then they would end up crowding out what commercial banks were doing because they would try to replicate it, and they wouldn't be taking on the risk. But then somebody is taking on that risk. If you are allowing development banks to take on more risk, lend longer term, invest in or lend in riskier projects that the commercial banks themselves won't, which I agree we should do, what you are creating more risk in the system. So someone has to pay for that. And of course, the people who will end up paying for that is either government, by putting in more equity, capitalizing the bank more. They're the largest capital providers of banks. Or it will be the bondholders who will pay higher borrowing costs. So that's the way to think about it. But my answer to your question very explicitly is they should be allowed to take more risk, and we should be encouraging and creating the financial structure that allows them to take more risk, which again, someone has to bear, which will largely be the state.
Please.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Yes. Excellent question, and we just had a breakfast on this topic, and we had one of the rating agencies in the room, right here in the building a few minutes before our panel started. I think this is an important and urgent issue, and I think there are a few critical roles. Number one is, as countries and as the private sector and banks and different financial institutions, we have a role to play in presenting data, real time, collating that data, and showcasing that data, because oftentimes the data that the credit rating agencies rely on at third party are very old, 2 to 3 years out, and because they don't have a presence in many of our countries, they are relying on a lot of perception, which then leads to the bias. And the example that was used today was actually from Benin. And Moody's, who was in the room, talked about how Benin, a country in West Africa, now has an A rating because they provided a lot of data, because they were very transparent and accountable, and they worked alongside. So I think for us as countries, as the sector, we need to do a lot more in presenting the data and the case. The case that African capital markets generated 6x S&P 500 is not known. We learn about this type of great news coming out of the continent. We sometimes keep it within our countries. We need to elevate it. And that's where One Campaign and others will be doing a better job of changing narratives and celebrating good stories and impactful stories from the continent. So data is critical, and I think what you've done in putting out the information about the infrastructure and the ecosystem is critical. We need to continue to update it and make it live and real, and then gather the data into the repositories that Remy talked about and make sure that it's real time, it can be trusted, and it's elevated. The second point, I think, is linked to this concept of mission-driven finance that actually changes ecosystem, and I think you made that case very well. And I think for me, when we think about the prioritization of what our economies need for growth, oftentimes we like to fund already successful businesses and help them become bigger. SMEs are critical. We need innovative finance and catalytic finance for health, for food systems, for critical minerals, for growth sectors. And that's where we need our development banks to step in. And they should be held accountable for how much they give. In many countries, the same big 5 companies get all the money from all the financial institutions and all the concessional financing. And I think a lot of our banks and development banks are a bit lazy, because they kind of say, oh, somebody gave them money, they did the due diligence, let me do the investment. I think we need to level the playing field. We need to hold them accountable to ensure gender lens investing, to ensure youth-based investing, to ensure that we are creating and enforcing the right type of financial flows to where they're needed the most, because we can generate wealth, we can create jobs, and we can change lives if we're mission focused and if we hold the financial institutions accountable to deliver, especially when they're getting the concessional financing, the de-risking instruments, and to ensure that they're deploying it in the right avenues. So those would be the 2 very direct entry points. And I think civil society, and One Campaign in particular, is ready to partner with you to hold our financial architecture responsible to deliver for people.
Thank you.
For me, there are 2 points which are very, very critical. One is the capitalization of MDBs. MDBs and NDBs, PDBs as well. So shareholders should provide more resources to capitalize their institution, because $1 in the capital of PDB can generate $4 leveraging on the market. So instead of throwing money, funding directly program for youth and women, part of the budget spending, the government spending, and part of the ODA should go to the capitalization of PDBs. I think that's critical. Second, the issue of perception, of the risk perception, can only be tackled through transparency. And so I think most of the effort should go to making these PDBs and also this Ministry of Finance more transparent. So that will definitely change the perception and will bring better rating from the rating agencies.
Just on the rating question, we were talking the other evening that the rating agencies should be rated, and they would fail. I mean, look at the film Enron, if you just want to have the movie version, the Oscar-winning movie version. They were absolutely responsible for the financial crisis. And I was speaking yesterday to someone who works in the mayor's team here in Cape Town. You know, the city gets rated, and they just get put in this lump of all the cities in South Africa. There's no even differentiation. It's a very condescending, badly informed process, and really it just has to stop, and it'd be great if platforms like this can really hold them to account. But the bigger question on risk, so I've written papers about, for example, how the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is way too concerned about its AAA rating, and it creates this ironic kind of self-fulfilling, weird, vicious cycle where, on the one hand, public banks are often accused of crowding out, and that's the kind of ideological side. By the way, the word crowding in is crazy that it's still negative. I mean, this is what I was saying before about the narrative, like crowding in is supposed to be the good thing, but you're still crowding. Just shows that we need that complete paradigm change. But the irony is that the more fearful you are and kind of timid and not being entrepreneurial and kind of leading in a mission-oriented way, the more you probably are crowding out, because you're just doing something that the private sector should be doing that maybe is too lazy to do, and you should get them to do it instead of replacing and, again, filling that gap. And by the way, that is a huge problem. So let's just also maybe bring in some numbers in terms of financialized private sector companies. They're not, in many parts of the world, reinvesting their profits back into the economy. We're talking trillions, $7 trillion has been used just to buy back shares by lots of big companies instead of reinvesting that money back in. There's other forms of financialization that itself is something that public banks could be helping to do, to make sure that loans that are provided to companies are, part of a deal, as I was saying before, where the profits that are then generated from that collective risk-taking, not de-risking, are reinvested back into the system and also directed through mission-oriented financing. But also this question of where's the money going to come from for the, if we use the word de-risking again, I mean, really setting these things up so they truly share in not just the risks but the rewards is the way to do that, that you're not just kind of covering the downside, but getting a serious share of the upside and kind of replenishing the coffers of the banks. And as much as we need, and I wrote a paper for UNDESA about this, a better, stronger relationship between the MDBs and the NDBs, and a better relationship between the NDBs, the national banks, and the private sector through these kind of progressive conditionalities, there is a bigger issue that a lot of these different instruments I mentioned before, procurement, but there's also guaranteed loans, haven't been structured in a confident public entrepreneurship kind of way. I always use Tesla as an example, given that the leader of Tesla is talking a lot out there. Tesla got the same amount of money from the US government, right, through a guaranteed loan. The US doesn't really have development banks, but they have all sorts of different public loan programs. And the same amount of money, that Solyndra got. Solyndra failed. It was a $500 million guaranteed loan. Taxpayer paid the bill, got pretty upset by it. Tesla was successful and the profits went private. And not only, how it was set up made no sense. So the Obama administration said, if you don't pay back the loan, so basically if you fail, we want 3 million shares in your company. Why would you want 3 million shares in a crappy company that doesn't pay back the loan? They should have said, if you do pay back the loan and you're successful, we get 3 million shares. The price per share went from 9 to 90. That difference multiplied by 3 million would have more than paid back the Solyndra loss and the next round of investment. But that requires like a public venture capital kind of mindset, whether we think of Yazma in Israel, whether we think of In-Q-Tel, the CIA's large venture capital fund. But that kind of confidence, not only of the deals that I mentioned before, like the KfW with steel, but also saying this is truly about sharing risk, sharing rewards, helping to direct investments towards the biggest problems of our time, but allowing the public purse to get replenished. That is not what's currently happening. And just super lastly, because I'm from Italy, I have 3 citizenships somehow, but anyway, born in Italy, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, which is our public bank, to be completely frank, because I think it is important to be frank and learn from the failures, in the past was part of the problem. Just giving out money to whatever sector lobbies its way up to be considered an important sector to get bailed out. Again, steel globally is getting bailed out with very little conditionality, very little investment as a quid pro quo of that loan. And again, that level of discussion, I think, in this platform, learning what it looks like to actually not just give out money to those who are begging for help, but to create a conversation. Why do you need help? Have you been investing? Have you been innovating? Have you been training your workers? Have you been thinking about sustainability along your supply chains? And if not, that's going to be part of the discussion about the loan program.
Sorry. I may have a follow-up question for you, Mariana, but others, I'm sure would like to jump in the discussion. You have worked extensively on the role of PDBs, not only as fixing market failures, but also market shaping. My question goes on 2 very specific sectors. One is the digital economy, the other one is carbon markets, which Remy Rio alluded to. Do you see a specific role of PDBs with regards to the private sector in these 2 very important sectors? One related to climate change, that is carbon markets. The other one, considering the size of the digital economy, not only on markets, but in our everyday lives. What do you think PDBs should do in these 2 sectors? And maybe other could comment also on the role of PDBs first on climate change and on the digital economy on the other hand. Thank you.
Just quickly, because I just...
And actually, so you were maybe I should share that you've written 2 papers on digital public infrastructure, for example, last year and the year before, so we will give the references if needed.
Yeah, so one paper is called Algorithmic Rents, and how there's lots of rent seeking actually going on right now in how we're designing AI. And by the way, don't forget that Adam Smith, when he talked about the free market, he meant free from rent. So reducing rent seeking, and by the way, there's lots of rents being earned in different countries, including in South Africa. Part of that also in terms of the financialized nature of the economy, but also in the UK, where something like 80% of our finance goes back to finance, insurance, and real estate. That's a financialization of the sector, but there's also financialization of corporate governance that I talked about before. But just, first of all, carbon markets, but more than that, just the sustainability agenda and how to transform that from a very broad challenge to concrete missions that actually then require different sectors to invest and innovate and also collaborate. You mentioned critical minerals. Well, we know that, for example, the extraction of lithium in Chile, where there's a progressive government very much thinking about sustainability, that extraction currently is very extractive of water also, very intense on the waterways, not sustainable. And so the role of a public bank would be, instead of thinking about lithium or natural resources as a sector, again, to save or to be treated as a national kind of key sector, how do we create a loan program that helps that sector transform, invest, and innovate towards the sustainability agenda? So, for example, to make sure that the lithium extraction is less extractive of water. We know that's also true with AI. Every time you send an email with ChatGPT, we need a bottle of water, 500 ml, to cool that email, right? So thinking about all these areas, not as sectors, but inputs towards a transformative agenda, which every country will decide what their transformative agenda is. But digital, especially, is going to have to be key to all our different, missions, whether it's the carbon reduction one, whether it's reducing the digital divide, by the way, that we saw with COVID. If we don't do that, inequality rises much more. But that happens, again, if we're very clear on what the goal is. Otherwise, we just start obsessing about the technology. And we should remember that almost all the technologies in your iPhones not only were funded by public institutions, but they were solutions to problems. The internet was a solution to the satellites having to communicate. GPS was a solution to the Navy wanting to know where the ships were. So asking really relevant problems that require solutions, using public loan programs to get the bottom-up experimentation in the business sector, and as Didi said, not just the incumbents, especially those who have been left out of that process. And that's why, again, procurement policy is so important on the demand side. So some countries have made sure that 5%, for example, of every department's procurement is procuring in innovative solutions from small, medium enterprises, not the big incumbents, but they also need that public loan program to get them off in the first place.
Maybe we'll go from Sidi, Ndidi, and then Aniket. So Sidi Oultan, any comments on digital economy and also sustainability? Again, not necessarily as a sector, but as a transversal objective.
Definitely. As you know, artificial intelligence is now taking a very important place in the world economy, and it is also presenting some challenges for the banking system as well, in terms of cybersecurity and also in terms of ability to safeguard data. But it presents also an opportunity for low-income countries, and particularly for Africa, to have a frog leap. So we do believe at Badaya that AI can really be a game changer for African countries if we provide the right framework to develop the system around the use of AI in Africa, but also if the education system is really given the whole required support to make Africa benefit from AI.
Thank you. Didi.
So I have a running joke after WEF. I said DEI is out, ESG is out, AI is in. Everybody wants to talk about AI and add AI to the end of their company name, the same wave we had when we were talking about .com. And I think while AI is really important, in many, many parts of the world, we need the fundamentals to be invested in. We still need infrastructure. We still need health financing. We need innovation to be infused in all of those sectors. But, I went to Morocco late last year, and hearing the Moroccan leadership talk about, we did the boring stuff, and that's why we have unemployment down to 10%. For me, this is where development banks should also focus, and a public infrastructure, public financial institutions and development banks. The boring stuff around the fundamentals are still key. And while they don't attract as much investment as we'd like, where we're pushing on the energy transition and AI, and that's critical for Africa and it's critical for every region, we still need the fundamentals. So while I agree with my previous panelists about the growth potential, about the potential for digital trade, which Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has really emphasized at the WTO, and the potential for digital trade in terms of our creative industries, which are phenomenal from the African continent, our music, our fashion, our art, and the potential to leverage AI to leapfrog, I want to underscore the importance of the boring stuff to drive economic growth, to drive resilience, to ensure that we change narratives and mindsets, and to build institutions that outlive political regimes and transitions.
Just to be very brief and to the point, no, I don't think development banks should focus on carbon markets. On the climate topic, they should focus a lot more on commercializing and scaling up climate technologies that are not yet commercial but could be over time. This is what the LPO in the US was trying to do under Jigar Shah, the guy who used to run LPO under Biden. And Mariana is right, there are many issues with it, but that was the right idea. I rather have development banks focus on that than carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is important. Carbon pricing is very important. Carbon markets are less important. We have to make a distinction between all of those. And I would just say to people in the room, that shouldn't be your high priority right now, just to be explicit about that.
So, thank you so much, Aniket. Maybe one last word, what you expect all the way between now and FFD4 next summer. What would be your one conclusion, one or two recommendations? Maybe we go from Aniket again.
I'm just going to add a different prism to this. I got excited about development banks 13 years ago because I read a book about the China Development Bank, which changed my life. It was the first book I read was called China Super Bank, written by Henry Sanderson and Michael Forsyth, two Western journalists who literally blew my mind. And then I read Chen Yuan's book, Aligning the State and the Market, which continued to blow my mind. And the way CDB works is completely different than what we've talked about so far. They created a different type of institutional architecture in China with the LGFVs, the local government financing vehicles. I'm sure there are people in this room who know it even better than I do. So my one thing to add to the conversation so we don't just repeat ourselves is a lot more lessons from China, the one country that has actually developed a state development bank that industrialized the country in 30 years. CDB was founded in 1994 and then was basically recreated in 1998 under Chen Yuan's chairmanship. That's what I would like to see us spend a little bit more time on. So just to add something new.
Thank you so much. I love that. I'm going to end with an Igbo quote, which says, "Mbelede kaja madike." It's during times of crisis that you know who's courageous, who's brave, and who's wise. We're facing a global crisis. We often lament about the issues, but we need courageous leaders who are going to take on the hard task of building a fair, just, and equitable financial system that works for everyone, including the most vulnerable. I think I would like to put that on the table as the guiding principle and the values of our year as the G20 and Africa's year hosting the G20, and push for fairer, equitable financing for Africa that is priced well and shares positive results. The cost of capital has to be front and center, and we stand by that. Let's have courage at this time, let's show wisdom, and let's work collaboratively together. Thank you.
I think everything has been said, but at this stage, I do believe that Africa has an opportunity really to learn from all the history of the world and all the experiences, and to create its own story and its own future.
Well, for me, it's easy because I've just written 2 papers and concluded both of them with exactly what should happen. One is with you and Deza on this notion that let's be careful again with the words. Blended finance sounds great, it's blended, it's finance, but actually when it has such low volume, low additionality, low mobilization, low leverage, and the whole public-private side has been designed badly, let's really rethink that. And that does require this market-creating one. And the other one was on this idea of mission-oriented finance. You know, first we need to align the NDBs and the MDBs around concrete goals. They currently aren't. Second, we need to use those missions to properly crowd in and galvanize and to create the multiplier effect that you mentioned is 1 to 4, but not always, because that requires, again, different types of contracts to make sure investment is part of that. And third, for that, we need to actually attach strong conditions around reciprocity to direct these public and private goals, and not seeing it as a gap to be filled, but really putting a lot of attention on the structure of the kind of patient, long-term, committed finance we need for development. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the very inspiring and thought-provoking input to our panel today. I think you have laid out several promising areas of future direction. I think the Global Research Network, PDB, we can devote effort in the coming years and to shape the debate and lead the discussion so as to unleash the full potential of PDB. Thank you so much. I want to invite everybody to give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to our moderators, Thomas Malonio and Professor Jiajun Zhu. And then, of course, our panelists were Ndidi Onkoko Nweli, the CEO of One, Dr. Sidi Ould Tah, who's the CEO of the Banque Arip pour le Development Economique in Africa. Professor Mariana Mazzucato is a professor in the politics of innovation and public value at University College London, and Aniket Shah is the managing director and global head of ESG and sustainability research at Jefferies. There are 6 panels starting now or have already started. They're very diverse. Please make your way there if you like. Just to let you know, the sporting arena will close at 12:30. If you want to go there, now is the moment. It will close at 12:30, and we'll be back here for the closing ceremony sharp at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Love the work you've done. Seriously, you've done amazing work. You've done amazing, real work that has added to the world you've done. So you should feel real. You built something